saw from the email. I hope you've got the reference in front of you in some form, either as a printout or on your monitor, where you can see it clearly, as well as my Zoom screen. So this lesson is going to be predominantly focusing on the things that I'm trying to stay aware of when I'm trying to mix accurate color. And clouds are a fantastic thing to study if you're trying to improve your color sensitivity and your sensitivity towards color temperature, warm and cool. They also have a wonderful variety of edges, both soft and hard. They generally have a very strong sense of 3D form with a dark base and a lighter top. I just think they're fantastic things to study. They're sort of translucent and opaque at the same time as well, and they cast shadows on each other. So they're just wonderful things to. I could spend years just sort of studying clouds. They are, however, very, very hard to paint from life because they're generally constantly moving and changing. So when I do paint clouds plein air, I either try and simplify the clouds, or I try to do something which is far harder and sort of take a mental snapshot of where they were and use my sort of knowledge of what I know about clouds to, once they've moved, to try and, I'll sketch out a sort of a general outline of that shape, and then sort of using my knowledge of how I've painted clouds in the past to fill them in. But it's very, very hard to do from life unless you're painting maybe incredibly small. If you do want to go outside and do cloud studies, I would recommend painting a series of very small studies, not worrying about doing a big painting because they are changing so much. So in terms of learning sort of the basics, photography is, I think, far more helpful because you can just slow down. So the reason I like this photo as well is because we've got sort of three clearly defined planes in a way. We've got these far background ones on the horizon. We've got this big chunky rectangular one in the middle, and one right in front of that. So it's not sort of an ambiguous collection of just white fluff. There's defined areas. And in the painting I've already done here, I was very much sort of considering that as I moved through. So we're going to be doing a version of this. Now, I don't know if you've all got the exact palette that I suggested, which was burnt umber, ultramarine, I think it was alizarin crimson, any yellow, and titanium white. It's not the end of the world if you don't have those exact colors. As long as you've got, a brown, a blue, a red, a yellow, and a white, you should be fine. One thing I would suggest that everybody does before we start, which won't take long, is something that I probably mentioned when I gave the demonstration last time at Clifton Arts Club, which is I don't use a black from the tube. My black is a combination of French ultramarine and burnt umber mixed together. I find the less colors you have in your palette, the more cohesive your paintings look from a color perspective. It's easier to control color the less tubes you have. If you only have sort of one blue, you know how that blue is going to behave. If you introduce doubles of everything, things start to get more complicated quicker. I do have two blues, two of every color group in my full palette as shortcuts, but for the purpose of sort of learning, my palette used to be very, very, very small. It does help you learn color temperature better. So what I would suggest is getting a dollop of ultramarine and a slightly smaller dollop of burnt umber, and mixing them together to make a jet black, and just keep that on the side. And also mix up another pile of the same thing, but with ultramarine and a bit more burnt umber. So what we will end up with is a pile of jet black, which I've got here. That is my mixture of burnt umber and ultramarine, and a pile next to it, which is more brown. So it's burnt umber with a little bit of ultramarine, and we're going to be dipping into these constantly. It's just easier than picking up a bit of burnt umber and then having to pick up a bit of ultramarine to cool it down. It's easier if we have these have a pre-mixed pile sort of ready to go. It doesn't have to be a big pile. We're not going to use tons of it, but the size of a blob that you would squirt out for any other color would be fine. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. One way to check that the color of the blob you've just mixed up is right. So you can, I'm just dipping my brush in a bit of painting medium, which is just turpentine and a bit of linseed oil, and I'm going into my blob of black. So this is the one you just mixed, and you can just put it on your board and smudge it with your thumb, and you can see the color of it. And I can tell that it's a very neutral black. It's not a brown black, it's not a blue black, it just looks black. And so that's what I want from my black. And then if I clean my brush and go back into my little pile of, I call it mid, because it's midway between blue and black, or sorry, brown and black. So that's my mid. So that's ultramarine with a touch of more burnt umber. And when I look at that compared to the black, you see it's a lot browner. Well, I hope you can see. So there's my black. There's my mid. That full burnt umber with nothing in it. You can see how red that is, I hope. So you can see the difference there. And it's very, very helpful to have those shortcuts. So I'll give you another minute or so just to mix up those blobs, because we'll be referring to those quite a bit. Yeah, one of the benefits, while you're doing that, one of the benefits of having a very limited palette, as I said, is you have one blue, so you know how that blue behaves. You have one brown, you know how that behaves, and so on and so forth for each of your main colors. But the drawback of having so few colors is each one of them is really intense. So it can be hard to create initially, it can be hard to create sort of very subtle tones if every time you go for a blue, you're picking up a big scoop of bright blue, and you only want to make it ever so slightly, the color ever so slightly different. And yeah, hence these shortcut blobs, combinations of colors.
Fabulous. Right.
Okay, shall we get going then?
Yep.
Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do, because this is already toned and dry, I don't need to do a wash or anything over this because I'm just working straight onto this tone board. I'm going to very quickly and fairly crudely sketch out the position of these clouds with a little bit of medium first. I want it quite watery. And one thing to bear in mind when I'm doing this, I'm not just going to use black or brown. I'm going to try and mix a color to sketch it out that's pretty close to the color of the thing I'm going to be painting, so I don't get this really overly bright or overly dark drawing lines showing through, which will distract me. So I'm looking.
Sorry, Tom. When you say medium, what is it? What is a medium?
The painting medium. It's just just turpentine with a bit of linseed oil.
Ah, right, okay.
So in terms of these clouds, my iPad displays images quite cool, actually. I noticed when I looked at my computer monitor, the clouds looked a bit warmer, almost brown, but on the iPad, how I'm looking at it, they look quite cool and blue. So I'll just get a tiny bit of black. It's very, very thin and watery, and a little touch of blue. So I'm painting with like a very cool grey blue color. So have a look. Yeah, that looks good. So oh, you can see that, can't you? Right. So straight away, I'm trying to work out where this first line is. It looks like it's just above the middle. So that if that's the middle, I'd say it's about there, and it comes around 2/3 of the way along. So I know it's just above the middle, and it's going to stop around 2/3 of the way along, around here. So that's going to be my first line. So already, it's not just a drawing line, this. We're already putting down color, temperature information, which in this case is this dark blue underside of the cloud. There's a sort of bits coming off the cloud there. I'm just going to put a suggestion of those in. I'm not worried about detail at this point, but it's going to help me orientate myself if I know that's there. And I'm just going to follow this and come up. Now this gets rather indistinct up here because the edges are so soft on the cloud. So sort of instinctively, I want to blur that line I've just drawn, which will, remind my brain when I come back up there that it's a lost edge. It's not a hard edge. Okay. Now, the next line I'm going to put in is going to be the horizon. And I'm breaking the image down into thirds. My brain says into 3 sections, not equal thirds. There's that bit, there's that bit, and there's the ground. And they're the main shapes to me. So this is narrower than that. So I'm going to start that about there. Now I'm going to go back into my sort of mid-brown color that I mixed up with the big blobs, because that is what the color of that grassy hill is. It's not blue like the cloud. So I'm trying to do everything I can to help myself see color from the very earliest stage. So that rises up a bit towards the right. And then I'm going to go back into this watery blue, and I'm going to paint the cloud shadow on the hill. Almost meets the top. And I'm very, very quickly and loosely going to fill that in. Okay, so there's not really much more drawing we need to do here. I'm going to bring that up slightly because it's dripping down. So this is what I would consider the second plane of the clouds. This big chunky one behind the top one. And I have to leave a gap between the bottom of this and the hill, which is a very thin, dark line. And I'm saying to myself, this cloud begins to rise up exactly halfway between the edge of the first cloud and the edge of the board. So I'm trying to make comparisons and give myself sort of marking points to speed my drawing up. So I'm always sort of mentally talking to myself saying, okay, that's halfway between there, that's a third of the way up from there, or whatever. I find that helps an awful lot. So, and the same here, where does this cloud start? Well, it's almost halfway between the top of the image and the top of the horizon, but it's just down from halfway. So halfway will be there. So I'm going to do it just down from there. And there's a sort of a bulbous bit of the cloud that comes out. So that's the second one. Now the third plane is the ones behind this, and it's just down from that tip. And we can see a little pocket of blue sky over here. So I'm going to paint in that negative shape, which is made from the back of this cloud and this other one coming in. Sometimes it's much more helpful just to look at the negative space rather than the form of something. Right. So yeah, that's touching the horizon, that dark blue. Okay. There's one more thing I want to define, and it's the lighter area of this large cloud here. I'm still going to use this thin blue. And I'm going to paint, actually going to paint a sort of darker mass as opposed to just drawing an outline of this shape, because I think that's going to make more sense to my brain. There's sort of a round highlight there in the cloud. So I'm going to leave that the color of the backboard and put a little bit of dark up the top. And that's a good starting point, I think. So I'll give you, shall I give you all a couple of minutes to get your drawing sorted out?
Yeah. I think we're keeping up with you, Tom. You're not going fast at all. I think
okay, great.
Push on.
Okay, I'll push on. Right, so now I've got my drawing. I'm happy with. I'm just going to darken this up slightly. Now I've established where everything's going to go. One helpful thing that I think I mentioned the last time I came was I often put in my darkest dark and my lightest light right at the beginning, and they act as stops, if you will. If I put in my darkest dark and my lightest light, I know that every color I mix, every tone that I mix after that has to fit within these 2 points. It can't be darker than the darkest one. It can't be lighter than the lightest one. And it seems to help a lot with judging, because everything is by comparison. The more things we have to compare, the more accurate we can be, and we won't get lost and end up painting everything, the whole painting too light and then struggling to darken it down, or we won't end up starting too dark and it looking dull at the end. So the darkest point obviously is this big shadow area here. I'm not going to worry about being super accurate with the color. This is more of a tonal consideration, how the darks and lights. So I'm looking at that. So on my screen, that looks like a very cool, like a cool grey blue. On a sunny day, people talk about rules in painting, like warm highlights and cool shadows and things like that, but I don't think it's helpful just to say, oh, that's a generic rule, that's what you always see, because it's not what you always see. On an overcast day when the sky looks white and there's just very, very thin cloud over the whole sky and you can't see any blue, you're not going to get really cool shadows. You only get cool shadows when the secondary light source is the blue sky, because the blue is lighting up everything that isn't directly lit by the sun. So this is a blue sky day, so you can assume that your shadows are going to be definitely on the cool side, because the only light source they're getting is indirect light, which is from the whole of the rest of the sky, not the sun. And if the sky is very blue, then everything in shade is going to be lit by that very blue light coming from the sky. So I'm doing black and ultramarine, the black that I mixed, and I'm going to put a touch of alizarin crimson, or any red that you've got will do. I am seeing that. I'm only putting a bit in. This is really thin, very transparent. And I'm just going to block that in. I'm probably not going to worry too much about actually painting the hill. I don't know how much time we'll have. I'm mostly going to focus on getting the clouds looking right for this demo. But if we end up getting down here, then I'll give it some attention. But I do want to get this blocked in to help me judge the tones in the rest of the painting. But it's generally a very similar tone. On the right hand side, there's sort of a, looks like a darker sort of rectangle there. So I'm going to emphasize that. And a few little dark streaks here and there at the tip up there. Right. You could, I'm just looking on my screen. It looks on my view of my zoom window that this is a lot darker than what I've painted. But to my eye, they look very, very similar. So maybe that's not coming across on video as well as I'd like, but to me, they look very, very similar.
Yeah, I think we're following you, Tom. You're trying to build up your tonal range.
Yeah. Okay. So next, I'm going to put my lightest light in. Now, this is quite crucial to get the temperature of your highlights at this point, because that's going to sort of set the tone for the whole painting. Now, the temperature of it will change from screen to screen, whatever you're looking at. Like I said, different monitors display at different color temperatures slightly, and there can be a big enough shift to the difference between painting the highlight on a cloud a cool blue or a light, very, very sort of pale yellow. It can be that sort of pronounced. And on my iPad, it does come out quite cool. So I'm grabbing some titanium white. And it's not a very, very, very occasionally we'll use 100% pure titanium white on a piece somewhere in a cloud, but it's very, very rare. It's almost never the case that pure titanium white looks good somewhere on a painting. It's just lifeless and cold. So I'm adding a touch of this gray color that I've already got here into it. I'm not adding just ultramarine because it's too cool. I know that this color I mixed up had some black in it, which means it's got some burnt umber in it, which is warmer. So you just want to put a touch in, because it's so easy to tone down titanium white. And one way sometimes I like to check that I haven't toned it down too much is I'll get another blob of titanium white, 100% titanium white, and put it next to the mix I've just made, and I can see how much I've darkened it then. And I don't know if you can see, it's coming across over Zoom, but I think I've actually gone a bit too far. So I'm going to mix in a little bit more titanium white. And yeah, I'd say that's sort of about half a tone to a tone down from pure white. So that's my lightest light now. It's not 100% titanium white. It's just a very, very light, very cool blue. And
that surface where you're mixing the colors, is that glass or plastic?
It's glass on top of a piece of unpainted, unprimed MDF.
Okay.
And the reason I do that is because it very, very closely mirrors the color of my ground.
Okay.
If your palette is a very different tone or a very different color to the ground you're painting on, it's harder to make the colors because you're mixing them with one sort of background. So compared to the palette, they look a certain tone, and then when you put it up on your painting, it can be different. So the closer you can get this looking to that, the easier your life will be.
Okay, thank you.
What I used to do actually was I would prime a piece of board, pure white, exactly the same size as my piece of glass, and then rub a ground on that used exactly the same paint as I used for this. This is just a new palette. I haven't had time to do it, but then you end up with exactly the same, and it's hugely helpful actually. All these little things, they all add up to making your life easier. The last thing you want to be doing in painting is fighting against yourself when you can make a very small change and make your life better. So the
thank you, very useful.
Yeah, no worries. So the lightest light I think is not in this front one. I think it's in this second one here. So it's there, and there. And I'm just gonna, this is very crude. I'm just gonna put a big splodge of this stuff in. And that's just so there we go. Everything now has to fit between these two values. Nothing darker than that, nothing lighter than that. And that should make life easier for the next step. So this might seem sort of overly fussy and technical, but like I just said, if you are interested in getting sort of accurate color temperature and tones that mimic nature, that mimic the thing you're looking at, there's lots of little sort of steps that you can incorporate that will just speed that all up, which is especially handy if you're painting outside and time is most definitely a factor and you need to work as quickly as possible. You need to eliminate sort of faffing around as much as possible. So I'm going to mix up the blue for the sky now. I think on this original painting, I did use an incredibly bright blue that I only normally bring out if I really can't get that brightness, which is a Windsor blue green shade. But it's very unwieldy and it's hard to use. It's got an incredibly high tinting strength. And I didn't think many of you would have it. So we're just going to stick with ultramarine for the purpose of this demo. So let's grab some ultramarine, some titanium white. So that's our starting point. Now this is way too warm, this blue. This has got almost like a greenish tinge on my screen. And it's graduated from light to dark. Yeah, ultramarine is a very warm blue. So I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to it. And a bit more titanium white. Okay, already that is massively improved. You can see that I'm not sure if it's coming across on the screen, but this almost looks like mauve or violet in comparison. Now I've put a bit of yellow in it. Now I'm putting a little bit more yellow in. Okay, we're definitely getting closer now. I'm going to lighten it up a little bit with a little bit more titanium white and a little bit more yellow. I try and blend everything a lot on the palette, so I get this sort of block of color rather than not mixing it through properly and then going up on the palette and getting a surprise with having like a dark blue streak within that's going to sort of throw me off. But I like to do a very thorough mix on the palette first, personally. All right, that's not looking too bad. Now, the easiest way to know if I've got the tone of my sky right is if I'm just going to put a bit more white. it's far easier to make judgments if two brushstrokes are next to each other. If my lightest point was in the middle of the cloud somewhere, and then I tried to mix my sky color, if I was painting the sky in here and my brightest bright was here, because if they were that far apart, it'd be quite hard to see if I'd got it right. But luckily for me, one of the lightest lights is right next to this blue. And it's always far easier to make tonal judgments when two brushstrokes are next to each other. So that's where I'm gonna start. And that's pretty good. I need to go slightly lighter and a bit more yellow. But again, it's just a little trick to speed things up and increase your accuracy. The first large area that I'm going to paint will always be the furthest thing away, and the furthest thing away is always empty sky. So I know I painted these first, but that was just to establish the tonal range. So now I'm doing this sort of block of color, and it's the furthest thing away. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm gonna come around. I'm painting a negative space really here, so I'm sort of following my drawing on the outline of the cloud. Quite a big brush, this, and you can drag and just let the bristles come over the edge, so we don't have a gap where you can see the ground coming through. Some people like to leave the ground showing through, but I think that's generally in the case of when they've put maybe like quite a bright orange ground down and they've done a bright blue sky on top, because if you have orange next to blue, they're quite complementary. So to have a little break in the blue showing some bright orange makes the blue look bluer. But in my case, this is a very neutral brown, so I'm sort of happy to sort of cover it up really. It will help when we come to do this and the grass, but I'll explain that later. Also, there's nothing more opaque than a blue sky. I think, like, if you're ever going to use really thick opaque paint, I think the sky is the place to do it. You want that absolute sort of blab of color, that impenetrably thick opaque paint seems to represent sky very well. Right, so I've got this first strip on. Now above it is darker and below it is lighter, so I'm going to do the lighter bit, so just a bit more titanium white. And now when you just add titanium white, you're cooling off your mix, and I don't want to do that. I want to keep it quite warm because it's like a greeny blue. So if you lighten with white, you have to balance the cooling off that titanium white gives by adding a bit more yellow. So you're constantly, so if that's cool and that's warm and up is tone, if you go up in tone with just white, you're going cooler and cooler and cooler. And we don't want to go warmer and warmer. We want to keep it absolutely vertical. We don't want the temperature to change. We want the tone to change. So we have to add white and yellow at the same time. And you have to sort of judge that yourself. So they're quite different tonally. I can just do a couple of strokes to blend between those two blues, and that's blended really nicely now. I'm just going to take that down to the bottom there. Okay, now above it, I'm sorry, I got my temperature back to front then with the blue. I often do that in my head. The green side is the cooler side and the red side is a warmer side. And so it warms up as we go up and it cools off as we go down. Apologies about that. I often get my temperature backwards on both. So I'm adding more ultramarine now as we go up. Okay, that's not enough. I don't want to go too warm, so I'm going to put a bit of yellow in. Let's see. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Right. Now, I'm just going to keep adding more and more ultramarine with a touch of yellow as I go up. Well, that's a lovely color. So if I get the if I sort of get the feeling in my head of being outside on a sunny day, suddenly when I'm applying a color, I know that it's sort of it's going right. You sort of want to look at it and feel that sensation of, oh yeah, that's what it. I know that feeling of looking at that deep, rich blue sky. Your memory of reality should sort of kick in, I think, and assist you. If it looks sort of unreal and weird, that might be a sign that you've made an error in your judgment. Right, now up here, remember that the edges are very undefined. So I'm going to help myself by I'm just going to blend with my finger. Because I don't want any hard edges at that point in the cloud. So that goes for the sky as well, because we'll blend the cloud into it. Okay, so I'm quite happy with this as a start. I'm going to go back to my lighter mix down here and pick that up and just paint in this bit of negative space here. So always remember, if you've got your nice mix on the go, look all over the painting for areas where that you see those colors and get them in. You don't want to have to remix it later, because again, that's going to slow you down, especially if you're outside. That's a problem. So I'm painting, this is an isolated bit of painting. There's nothing I'm painting that's next to it, but I already know that this is right because I did it next to the highlight. So it's the same pool of color. So I'm confident to just put that in. Slightly lighter at the bottom, but not by much. Right. Now, the next thing, are you happy for me to just keep going?
Yeah.
So the next thing is the next closest object in the scene after the sky, and that's going to be the furthest away cloud, which is these horizon clouds. Now this, if something is potentially significantly darker than your memory of what you think the thing is, it can be quite hard to get the color right. But when you think cloud, you think white, fluffy, bright. But really, when you paint outside a lot, you start to notice that clouds very close to horizon are not tonally light at all. They're often a sort of grey purple hue, and you just won't see these bright highlights. Almost never. I don't think I've ever seen it, and that's just because of like dust and pollution and heat haze. Anything far away on the horizon just cannot have those high contrast properties that these foreground big fluffy clouds that are closer to you. So we've got to bear that in mind when we're mixing these. I'm just using that pool of titanium white that I had for the highlights, but I'm gonna grey it down with a bit of black. Because the last thing we want is all of these clouds to have the same tonal range and the same temperature, because they won't look like they're coming forward. There won't be any sense of distance, and they need to look isolated in sort of 3 different planes. So I've got titanium white, a bit of black. I'm going to put a bit of blue in, ultramarine, and a bit of red, alizarin crimson. And that gives me like a grey purple. So tonally, I know that it's ever so slightly darker than the sky. It's a bit darker, it's a bit grayer, and it's a bit redder. That looks pretty good, but it's still too light. So I'm going to go more black and a touch more blue. So everything by comparison, I'm comparing it to the sky. And as I said before, I know the sky's right because we've got it here. We've got it here next to the highlight. So this little pocket is right. So, okay, that's better. So ever so slightly darker than that bit of sky and a bit grayer. So I'm going to put this sort of bank of clouds in. So there's very sort of subtle small variations here. There's some little highlights. I'm just touching into the titanium white to show those. And there's almost like on my screen, there's almost like a pinkness to the highlights, but it absolutely isn't anywhere near as bright as this. Nowhere near. So, and I'm following along all the way along the horizon, these very, very distant clouds. Oh. And although they're small, I think it is worth trying to pick out their form. And you should be able to see the underside of them is much cooler. So there's a sort of like a thin strip of like a darker blue underneath them here. It is quite tiny, but you've got to get that in. And getting the temperature right will tell the story of that little cloud just as important, just as well as the tone will. So it's not good enough just to have like a darker bit. It's got to be cooler as well, because that's what we're seeing. Definitely bluer. And there's a little underside there that's dark. But I just sort of painted a sort of grey purple mass in there, and I'm going over the top with a slightly darker blue just to pick out the underside of it. Doing very minimal blending. It's tempting to over blend everything with clouds to try and get this sort of cotton candy look, but I wouldn't really recommend doing a lot of blending until maybe right at the end, where you can control it better and pick out certain areas that you want to blend more than others, rather than everything just being this sort of blurry mess. Right. Okay, so at this point, suddenly dips down to quite a bit darker and bluer. You're just sort of threading this little puzzle together of these subtle shifts in tone and temperature. And then down again, a bit more red, I think. Now, in your peripheral vision, you should always be seeing this dark shadow mass that we put in right at the start. And that should be helping you a lot. Even though you're not looking directly at it, the fact that it's there is just making your judgments much easier. Okay, now the last third of this distant horizon band of clouds is really quite blue. You might want to sort of compare it to this bit of sky. It's not as blue as that, but tonally it's very similar. So it's like a more grey version of this sky colour. So I'm going to add black and a little bit of blue to get that cool grey. Get that in. Yeah, that looks nice. I find fingers to be very good blending tools, just as much as brushes. All right, and then there's a little chunk up there. So this is like the back side of, it's almost like the back side of this middle cloud. Okay, that's that dark chunk put in, and then it lightens up again. And then grays out again here. So by the time you're at this point, tonally, these are very, very similar. This cloud and the sky are very close together. From a tonal viewpoint. You don't want a lot of contrast in this area. And then you've just got that small highlight in the bottom right corner. There we go. Now I see that as a bit warmer, so I've added titanium white and a tiny bit of yellow to warm that up.
Is that quite a stiff brush you're using, Tom?
It's a synthetic brush. It's nylon, but it's quite a long. It's quite a long.
Okay.
Quite a long brush. So that it is nylon, but it's got a lot of flex due to the length of the bristle. Right, I'm just gonna. Oops. Yeah, this darker section here, I'm actually coming back in and dragging it over just over the top, over the border of this cloud, because it's actually in front of these. I'm just letting the sort of splayed hairs cover the transition between one cloud and the other, and that sort of makes it look like it's in front of it if I'm pulling paint over the border of where the two clouds meet. Right, so now we've got, I'm quite happy with that. We've got background clouds, the sky. I'm just going to put a bit more highlight down here. A tiny bit, accentuate that a little bit. I don't want to get too fluffy because I want it to have some life. I don't want to paint out all of the personality from the brush strokes. Right, I'm going to clean my brush.
I was about to ask you when you clean your brush.
Yeah, I try and I normally have quite a few brushes on the go, so I'll have like a highlight brush and a darker brush, and I'll try and switch between them so I'm not constantly trying to clean off dark to mix a highlight, because then I muddy up all my highlight pools of color on the palette, and then they're not as light anymore. So it's good to keep like a light paint on one brush and dark on the other, and switch between them if you've got the discipline. Right, so I'm going to tackle this central, slightly complex actually, this cloud, this central one. One of the defining characteristics about this cloud is this almost razor thin base to it, which is dark blue. And that's going to be absolutely crucial that we get that. And that's going to give the cloud weight, because you know it has this dark base to it. So we're going to try and get that thin line in. So I'm going, again, it's just the black we mixed, ultramarine, and a bit of alizarin crimson. And again, I'm sort of trying to keep this first big cloud shadow in my peripheral vision, trying to keep aware of it as I put this on to check tonally whether I think it's accurate. Right, so that's too dark, I think, than what I just put on. That's just initial reaction, is that just seemed too dark. And yeah, this sort of painting the farthest thing away first, you just get this lovely natural overlap of all your subsequent brush strokes overlap the previous ones. And especially with clouds, if you can discipline yourself to not go back and mess with the previous planes that you're painting, and you can, if you get the colors right, you can move on and not go back, hopefully. And if you can discipline yourself to do that, and you do get that subsequent overlap on the sort of the borders between your shapes of each new thing that's closer and closer to the viewer, you'll just naturally get this wonderful illusion of depth. So I'm pulling that shape all the way along. Right, pretty happy with that. Now, as we get the sort of back quarter or back third of it is the sort of darkest area of that cloud, but it's a warmer tone. It's not as cold as the very, very base. So I'm going to add a little bit of black and lighten up this mix to warm it up slightly. Let's have a look. Yeah, that looks quite good. So it's lighter and warmer than that base stripe.
It's quite a strong blue you're coming in with there.
What's that?
That's quite a strong blue, tonally.
Quite dark, do you think, or saturated?
It's saturated, I think. It's good because you've now brought a mid-tone in between.
Yeah, so when we get up to this one, we're going to get even darker again when we get to that top cloud. So when I'm getting to the edge of this cloud, I'm letting the bristles sort of flick and pull over the bit of sky we've painted, and that creates that wisp, that wispiness, which makes it look cloudy. It's the only way I can sort of describe it. So we're not blending it into oblivion. I'm letting the bristles sort of tell the story. Okay. And then as we come across, it's lightening up. And now I've actually come to meet my original dab of highlight, and I can see I'm too dark. I've come up to meet it now, so I'm going to lighten up because it's too much of a jump. Get to that highlight. I know that highlight is right. There we go, that's better. That's better. Oops. So I probably should swap brushes here and use like a highlight loaded brush, but I'm trying to do the transition from dark to light, so I'm going to stick with this one brush. Right, I'm sort of very carefully coming to the edge of the base of the cloud now. I don't want any of this lighter color to bleed into that lovely dark blue strip we put down, because that's going to kill the form. I'm switching brushes now. I'm going to have a light one on the go. I'm not going to have to hop back and forth. So, highlight. I'm doing, yeah, minimal blending.
Well, we're about to come up to the hour mark. So if you
Really?
reach the time, yeah, it flies. Really
Yeah.
does fly.
Should we, if I just finish this section and then
Yeah,
we'll just
then you'll
have
take a break.
Yeah.
Fabulous. I know you're into it.
Okay, so this bit of the cloud is actually quite a complicated section. There's a lot going on here, but I've got enough reference here to compare it to, so I can say, well, this color that I'm trying to mix is, how much does it look like the one I've already done over here? And it's almost identical, so I know that, I'm pretty sure that's right. So the further we get through the painting, the more we get to use comparison as a tool, which is very, very helpful. But the flip side of that is, the more errors you've made in the first stages, the harder it's going to get, because you're going to be comparing new mixes to previous mixes that you maybe got wrong, which is why it's so important to check that you're happy that everything's right before you continue. Richard Schmid said a really good tip, which was never knowingly continue leaving something that you know to be wrong without correcting it, because it will just mess you up later in the painting.
Okay, yeah, that's very good.
And I think that's really good advice. So it is tempting just to be like, oh yeah, I know that's not right, but I want to move on. And then it was just going to haunt you later, because it will always be in your peripheral vision, and you'll make some judgment later, subconsciously taking in that mistake as something you're using to make your subsequent judgments, and it's going to throw you off. So this is almost like a patchwork. I'm hopping between brushes loads now, because it's sort of a real mixture of lights and
Tonal
dark.
ranges that you're working with, yeah.
Yeah, well, this is where you're going too fast for me, Tom. I'm just no longer with you, really.
Oh, okay. So all of these tones and temperatures are very close. We're just sort of hopping between them. My highlight colors are still there. These are one of the first colors I put in, and I can dip into those and just darken little sections of them, to make these sort of puffy cloud shapes, because I sort of blocked in an area really that was light, but when you actually get to sort of painting that bit, the whole thing isn't light. So I'm putting dabs of slightly darker colors, and I'm very, very gently taking a brush along the edge where the edge of the cloud meets the sky, and I'm just sort of interrupting that edge ever so slightly just to blend those together. But it's incredibly gentle, and generally I'm wanting to pull from the cloud out. I want to pull the cloud over the sky. I don't want to pull the sky into the cloud. If I pull the sky into the cloud, the sky is on top of the cloud then. But if my brushstroke is from inside out, the cloud will be pulled over the sky, and the 3D effect that we're going for will just sort of happen much more naturally. So on this top corner, it's bright, but it's just off the highlight color, and I'm dragging my paint just off the edge into the sky, and you get this lovely. I might come really close in with the camera actually at this point. Can you see that?
Yeah, beautiful.
So there's these tiny little kicks coming off the hairs of the brush, just create these little kicks. Brushes can naturally describe some things in nature sort of perfectly just through the way the hairs interact. And it's one of the sort of greatest pleasures of painting, I think, if you're trying to do sort of representational work, is when your tools naturally mimic what you see in nature. That's such a blessing to have that shortcut.
Yep.
And there's all sorts of ways you can exploit your tools to, from stippling or flicking to get spots, maybe to, some people do that to make sort of gravel and stones. I mean, you can end up getting sort of ludicrously detailed with it all. And I try and tend to stick to just brush strokes. I don't really employ any other methods. I find that you can create the impression of almost anything just with a brush. So right on the tip of this cloud, it sort of rolls tonally. We're going from very bright, and then again that very thin, cool blue strip at the bottom, and it is very thin, and it tails off into the sky a little bit, and you can let the paint blend there. I'm painting over the top of the sky we've already done, and just dragging the paint into it and letting it blend in. It's a very, very soft, lost edge in there. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna personally, I'll stop there and I'll bring the camera in closer. So while you all catch up to a point where you're happy to take a break, I'll sort of slowly scan over the painting so you can have a closer look.
Fabulous.
Right. Okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'm just doing a very, very tiny amount of blending to that bottom dark line. And I might reinstate that highlight area. I think I killed it a bit when I was blending over here. I think it does need to be brought back up a bit. And blend that in.
I don't know if anybody's noticed, but it's a wonderful blue sky day with very similar clouds outside.
Well, the weather today?
Yeah.
Oh, I've got my blackout blind down, so I can't really see anything. Right. Okay. So I'm
All right.
happy so far with that. Let's give you a little fly through if I can.
Beautiful. Yeah, can just see your brush strokes.
So like I said, I don't want everything blended to a blur. I want the brush strokes as they can look like clouds, and we'll do, if it does, we do need to really blend anything away, we'll do that right at the end.
Okay, great.
Is it focusing that close?
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's yeah, fabulous, Tom. Okay, should we take a 10-minute break and catch up with you at, or take a 5-minute break at about 1:45?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm gonna eat some jelly babies. I'll see you in a minute. Right, let's go. So I'm just gonna put back in some of my lightest lights that actually got painted out when I came in on this one and started to blend a bit. So it's almost the entire focal point of the painting is this highlight right here on this cloud. I feel like there's a glow emanating from there that has to be described for the piece to be successful. So I'm just going to try and increase that before I move on. Yeah, I thought I remember when I was starting out painting outside, I after a while, after sort of a lot of struggling, then suddenly I would be able to, it would almost like a pop. There would be like a 3D pop sensation that would suddenly appear when I got it right. So that's what I would always be looking for when the illusion of getting the temperature right and the tone right. Once that happens, you sort of instinctively know, because this weird thing happens, and it just sort of begins to pop out at you. So if I don't feel that, I know that I've done something wrong. So I'm always sort of trying to wait for that. The moment that feeling comes, it's like, oh yes, right now I know it's working. And if I don't feel that, I know I've somewhere along the line, one of my darks is too dark and my lights are too light, or the temperature's off, or something's going wrong if you haven't got that sensation, I think.
It's like a eureka moment.
Sorry?
It's a eureka moment. As long as you don't go running down the street naked.
Yeah.
Like
yeah. And when if it happens, the first sort of time it happened, it was incredibly exciting, actually. To think that you can, that paint can do that. You just have to get it right, I guess. I'm just tidying up a few areas here, and just a little bit of blending here and there. Right. Are you happy for me to start on this bigger one?
Yes.
Okay, I'm actually I'll do this bottom corner first. I'll try not to go too quick. So again, there's this razor thin dark blue base to it. And I'm going to let these brush strokes overlap this bottom portion. And I'm going to switch my brushes.
What size brush you're using, please?
It's a 2. It's a Rosemary & Co. Evergreen long filbert, and it's a size 2.
2.
too. Yeah. I tend to do quite small paintings, so I use sort of zeros, twos, and fours a lot. I think. Okay, so I'm alternating between two different brushes, my light brush and my dark one. So this is my light one, and this is quite a nice little cloud actually. This one in the corner. It's got a nice form to it. So it seems like quite a simple graduation from dark to light. I'm just adding titanium white at the moment, nothing else, and it seems to be keeping the temperature and the tone where I want it. A bit more titanium white. And one thing I don't want to draw attention away from my focal point here with my main highlight. So I'm going to make sure this doesn't go too light. So that's a point where you're not just being a slave to the reference. You're thinking about the piece as a painting in of itself, not just a copy of something. So you might want to make a conscious decision to control certain bits to make it work better as a painting, rather than, yeah, like I said, if you're using photo reference, you don't always get this perfect photo where everything is the right size and the right shape and the tones all match up. Sometimes you do, but it's very rare. But that's the sort of the pleasure of painting, is that you're in control, and you can move things and you can leave things out if you want. Right. Okay, so I'm just about to finish this little highlight there. Okay, I'm going to start this big one. So this is the most interesting part of the painting to me, is doing this big dark underside, and that's where all the drama is in clouds. When you get that sort of heavy dark blue base, and it gives it that menacing appearance, which I find very exciting, especially when you are outside on Dartmoor and the clouds are that low. So black, blue, and red again, I'm mixing up. On my screen, it's a sort of a grey purpley blue. And remember, there's brown in this black, so the black will help warm it up a little bit. It doesn't just make it like a dead grey. Right, let's see. So when I'm putting this on, I'm comparing it, because it's right next to here. I can compare it straight away. Have I got it right? That looks pretty good to me. I'm going to drag it, and I'm going to lift my brush up and just let that little kick, that's describing the fluffiness of the cloud. I don't want a hard edge, but I don't want it over blended. Drag this along. You can sort of pull off and let these wispy bristles make that sort of cotton candy effect. I'm going to have to switch to a smaller brush now to do these sort of bitty bits. They're a bit more broken up. This is a bit harder to do. So this is definitely where I'm trying to use the natural sort of kick and wisp of the bristles to describe these bits of cloud that are separating off the main one and sort of drifting away. And the only way to do this and make it look right is by painting, on top of the cloud. There we go. these are sort of like what you've got to sort of get it right in one hit with these. They can be quite tricky. And if I did get them wrong and I just ended up with a big blurred mess, I would probably wipe them off, actually, repaint that area of the cloud beneath, and then try again. Because for the effect to work, you really do have to you have to be painting on top and letting it drift over the bottom there. Okay. So I've got to take this dark color all the way to the edge. Oh, it's a bit light. Need to mix up another pool. So yeah, you want to use enough medium or turpentine to the point where I think you need enough to where the paint will actually flow and come and smear over the board. But you don't want so much that it's, you know, thin, almost like watercolor, because then it loses, the color just loses all of its punch. And especially when painting skies, you need that opaque blockiness to the color. Or it's just going to look sort of thin and weak. Right, so there's a very sort of dark, you can still see the outline of my original wash drawing. I'm going to take it to about there. I think I might be tonally just on the cusp of being too dark up here, so I'm going to knock that back a little bit lighter. Okay, I'm switching brushes here between the light and the dark one now. I'm going to go to my light one again. You really only need 2 brushes on the go, I think. And you've got this sort of purpley highlight here. Find it very satisfying to put these highlight areas on a cloud and then see the sort of 3D form as it starts to come towards you just by putting these little highlights on there. You can see the cloud sort of starting to take shape. So all of this area of the cloud, all the way up to the top, the edges are very, very soft. They're almost what I describe as lost. There is very little delineation between each area, cloud and sky. They just sort of blend together. So it's fine to be quite sort of bit overzealous with your blending. It doesn't matter here. You don't have to worry about that sort of kicking the bristles out to make any sort of wispy bits. You can just mix them up. Temperature wise, I've gone too red here, so I'm trying to bring it back. Do I need to cool it down with a bit of white and a bit of blue? Still too warm. Alizarin crimson is such an unbelievably powerful pigment. It's got very high tinting strength. So if you are struggling with how powerful it is and you are painting cloud, you might want to try cadmium red instead, which itself is quite strong, but it's not as strong and unwieldy as alizarin crimson. I just happen to think alizarin crimson is more versatile as a red. That's why I use it. Right, so yeah, I'm blending this into the point where the cloud is just lost into the blue sky. And these very soft areas hopefully should work in contrast to these harsher lines down here. And sort of, yeah, when combined as a whole, should add quite nice dynamics between. I always want to try and get that soft edges, hard edges, light areas, dark areas. Everything has got to sort of work together. This is warming this up. If you had a brush that had very splayed bristles where the brush was almost looked a bit knackered, that's quite a good thing to use to get the lost edge. If you've got a brand new brush that's a bit more perfect, it can be a bit harder to get these soft transitions. How are we doing, acrylic people?
I don't know if you've got any of them left with us, Tom. You've kind of even left the oil painters in your wake.
Right, so I'm trying to get now, I'm working this dark shape up here, which comes around this sort of circular highlight. So I need a very smooth transition from this nice dark shadow area up into the top of the cloud. So that was too light. Okay, that's better. That's closer. I'm just going to try and blend these two areas together. A bit lighter. It's rather sort of indistinct, this part of the cloud. It's hard to tell sort of what's going on. It's a real mixture. But we've got so many pools of color going that you can pick up like highlight lighter bits and dab those on, and darker bits, and it's all sort of mixed together. The most important thing is that we're focusing on the temperature of the colors and the basic shapes. You don't have to try and paint every single wisp. That's going to slow you down a lot. Yeah, that's looking okay. So we're having a gradual graduation between this dark underside coming up. It's getting lighter and lighter. A bit more white. Oops. I'm leaving this highlight. I'm going to come back to that when I've painted enough of this higher bit. These highlights here are they're quite cool actually. A bit more blue in that, I think. Okay. So this color here, I can see it. It's here as well. It's quite similar, but we have to transition to these lighter areas. I might actually go onto a bit of a bigger brush now. That looks quite good. So that's a number 4.
Tom, I'm puzzled because I've got no white of the cloud in the top left of the picture at all, or the center, the higher center.
Yeah.
Did you? I don't think we painted any white there, did we?
No, because that wasn't our lightest light. We only put in the lightest light, which was there and there. This is more of a, when we come to paint this, we have to make sure that this is darker than here. Is that what you meant? If I got that, if I misinterpreted your
It's
question?
exactly what I meant, yes.
Right, okay. Yeah, so we have to be careful not to shoot past these areas. So, right, so the other thing, clouds sort of have planes within them as well. Like this bit is definitely in front of the base. It's sort of almost like the cloud is quite like a cube and this bit's hanging over it. So it wouldn't hurt at all to have some sort of wisps travel over this dark bit just to accentuate the fact that it's forward and it's in front of it. So let's mix up, it's a bigger area this, so I'm going to grab more paint. Bit black. Mix up a big pool I can work with then. Blue. Trying to get it really well blended. A bit of red. Right. Okay, I think that's too light. I like to check, and you know, you can mix something on the palette and think, oh yeah, that's definitely it, and start scrubbing it on, and it can be completely off. So I'll often mix as close as I think I can get it on the palette, then just do a little dab and think, is that what I meant to do, rather than commit and then have to wipe something off and make a huge mess. So I'm reasonably happy with that. So I'm letting it transition over that dark area so it looks like it's in front. Need to blend that. And sort of start working my way up. A bit lighter. I like to use the biggest brush I feel I can get away with. I think you tend to get more interesting, bolder marks. So, but I still want, you know, and to feel like I'm in control of it, but I want it to look like a painting. I want you to be able to look into it and see, you know, and see brushwork. And I think lighten it up a little bit, bring this down to meet it. And then we're just left with these highlight areas here that are the, I would say, are the closest point of this particular cloud to the viewer. So I'm trying to think in 3 dimensions while I'm painting. I think, how far away is it? How close is it? Okay, so yeah, how does that compare to the lightest light? I think I probably need to go a little bit lighter. And then put a block in a bit lighter still. That's getting there. Then I can sort of move the brush around and try and blend that in a little bit. Okay, I still don't think that's light enough. And we're still not as light as our lightest light here, so I'm okay. And one thing is, if you're trying to lighten an area you've already painted, you're mixing paint into paint, so it's always going to take a bit more white to get up there, so it just blends in on the board. Okay, and then It's covered most of that area. A bit lighter there. Really trying to get the form of this right. Oops. I'm still not happy with the tone of that. I think it still has to go brighter. And I'm now starting to I'm really starting to think about the direction of my brush strokes as well. And when you do that, when you're painting clouds, you can you're controlling the wind almost. I'm trying to imagine how the wind might be affecting this cloud. And is the cloud sort of rolling this way? Is it swooping up that way? With brushwork, you can definitely sort of accentuate that more so than you see in the photo, for sure. And that's where you can start adding your own sort of drama. So here, this is I've overdone it a little bit, I'd say, compared to the reference photo, but I find the marks are quite sort of a bit more exciting and dynamic than I'm seeing on the photo reference. Right, so now this is a bit tricky actually, this highlight. I'm going to go to my smaller brush again. I think it almost doesn't match with the rest of the cloud. It almost looks too smooth, like a sort of like a button, which is quite strange. I'm actually just going to paint in a circle because that's what I'm seeing. And then mix up that highlight. Again, I'm thinking about my brightest brights. So I think that needs to be a touch cool. I'm going to put white and blue in that. I'm going to go in a circle again to blend it. It's a very odd part of the cloud. Okay, that's still not bright enough. So a bit more white, a bit more blue. Whoops. Ah. Big old smudgy mess now. Okay, nearly there. There we go. Okay. Tonally, I think that's much better. Still not as bright as this, but okay. Adding a few more highlights dotted around that I can see that I might have missed. Okay, now I'm quite happy now with this, how this is coming together. That's pretty much all of the clouds painted. Is it? Oh, there's a tiny, you could add a tiny little wisp up there. Yeah, you could, I mean, that's another part of the creative side. If you want to add a few more, wisps and stuff coming off, that can That can be a bit more make it a bit more interesting. Just a few little bits here and there coming off. You can add depth. There's a little gap in there which is bugging me. It's drawing my eye, and it's part of the dark part of the cloud that's quite important to describing the form. So I'm just going to fill that in. Try and mix this dark color I had before. There we go. Right, I'll give you a little pass over the painting close up again, so you can have a better idea of what I've done. Okay. Oh.
Looks great, Tom. Fabulous brush strokes. Yeah.
Really beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you very much. Right, so if you're happy, I can start talking about this ground. The hill.
The foreground.
The foreground. Thank you. So we've got a load of paint here. I'm happy enough with this to where I'm not gonna do any changes to this now. It's fine. So I'm going to clear a space on my palette for you so you can actually see what I'm doing for this next bit. Yeah, if you do clear an area on your palette, make sure that you've got rid of all the paint, because sometimes, especially if you're needing to mix up a dark color, even the slightest amount of titanium white can end up making any dark pool of color you mix too milky. Yeah, be ruthless with your palette cleaning, especially if you're mixing darks. Right, now we can see tonally this is way too light, but this, where the drawing has dripped down, that looks very, very close actually. That was because when I drew that, remember I tried to make the drawing, the very thin paint, a brown. When I was drawing out the clouds, I was making it pale blue, and when I was doing it, so the thinking ahead there is helping us already. Now we're getting the benefit of that. So this is already very, very close to the grass color, so that's going to help me now, and it will help hide the transition between the grass and the sky. So looking at this straight away off the top of my head, I'm going to grab this mid color, not the black and not the burnt umber. I'm going to grab some black, some white, a little bit of white, not too much. Actually, I need quite a bit more than that. Now, tonally, it's very close to the sky. I know it's a completely different color, but tonally it's very close to the sky. I just added some burnt umber in that to warm that up. that looks, so that was white, burnt umber and ultramarine. Well, because the blacks make burnt umber and ultramarine. It really is, it never ceases to amaze me how versatile burnt umber, ultramarine and alizarin crimson are, just as a 3 and white. It's remarkable how many colors you can make from just those. Probably need to warm that up. I'm going to put a tiny bit of red in there. That's looking, okay, that's looking pretty close. Let's do a little test. Right. This is a good opportunity to, there's a bit of green actually, but I'm going to worry about that later. This is a good opportunity to demo how using variety in your opacity of your paint mixes can help describe a surface. So in the sky, we wanted everything very opaque because clouds and sky, it's just how they look. But on the ground, there's this sort of granulated texture because the brown heather is distributed over the hill in clumps. It's not a flat lump like that blue is a flat lump. There's granularity and texture in it. And one way to sort of mimic that is to use your paint a bit thinner than you might normally would. And when you put it on, just the brush strokes gives the impression of, you know, like a texture. If we just paint everything completely opaque, we get these very flat areas. But so I'm just going to scrub this on, and then I'm going to take a tissue and just wipe it back a little bit. Can you see that? Is that clear enough on the video? There's sort of a slight shift in the tone, but it's enough to where it's like describing like a texture, textures or a little shift. I'm going to add in a little bit of, I'll put this back. I'm going to add in a little bit of brown. And because this is a shadow, it means it has to have a very, very soft edge. It just has to, or it won't look right. So this paint is really thin that I'm putting on now. Very, very thin. And I'll come up to the horizon. And I'm going to go across. Okay, I'm blending in that shadow edge. I want that to combine with it. Right, I'm going to pick up a clean bit of tissue. It's very easy to pick up a bit of tissue you've been cleaning your brush with, go to wipe your painting, and you might have cad red on your tissue, and then you wipe. Oh, I've done that many times. It's a disaster. So because I've painted that so thin, I can now rub it back. And now I'm sort of painting form in just using my finger. So any highlight where the sun is sort of hitting more there, I can rub it back there and create this highlight. And in the foreground as well, the sun's hitting the grass. So I'm going to really try and rub that back. If I rub too much, I'll end up rubbing the ground off probably, which I don't want. So I've got to be slightly careful. I think that's quite effective in describing the surface that we want to describe, which is dry sort of dry grass, really, isn't it? And I'm just trying to blend that transition between the cloud, shadow, and the grass. Like I said, it has to be soft. Otherwise, it won't read well as a shadow in our eyes. Okay, getting there. Now I can go in and add a little bit more brown to sort of to describe the heather in the foreground that I can see. This is actually quite tricky to pull this off without it looking just like a load of random blobs. But yeah, that's not too bad. And again, artistically now, I'm going to make some decisions sort of independently of the photo reference. I want the focal point to be more in the middle, so I think I'm going to rub back a bit more up here just to create a sunspot on this hill. So that's drawn my eye in now. Can you see that? It's created a focal point. And now I'm looking more, and now I'm thinking more about the center of the painting than the edges. Okay, and that's it. And then I would normally start the painting with the end of the brush that I had sharpened with a pencil sharpener. And that's that.
Brilliant, Tom.
All right.
Fabulous.
And how did you manage to get the timing so perfect? That's what I want to know.
What is that? Is that the end? Like
Exactly 2 hours. Well done.
Well, that was an accident.
You're a superstar, Tom.
Oh, thanks. I hope it was